Darkness was the first thing I knew, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed against my face and smelled of antiseptic, floor wax, and stale coffee. It wasn't the darkness of sleep, nor was it the comforting, velvety black of the ocean depths I had known as a young man. It was a solid thing, a wall that had been erected between me and the rest of the universe. I am Henry Cobb. I am 78 years old. I am a retired Navy Master Chief who spent 30 years listening to the static of the Pacific, hunting for the faintest ping of a Soviet submarine in the crush of the deep. I know silence. I know the difference between the silence of an empty ocean and the silence of a held breath before a torpedo launch. I respected silence. I used to crave it. But the silence inside my own body was a new, terrifying frequency. I tried to lift my hand to scratch a phantom itch on the bridge of my nose. It was a simple command, a neural impulse I had sent a billion times before. Lift hand, scratch nose. Nothing happened. I tried to shift my legs to relieve the pressure on my heels. My legs were heavy logs, distant and unconnected to my will. I tried to open my mouth to call out, to ask where I was, to demand a report. My jaw was a stone block, cemented shut. I was screaming, bellowing with the full force of my diaphragm, shouting orders that would have rattled the bulkheads of a destroyer, but the room remained dead quiet. Not a whisper escaped my lips. I opened my eyes. That was the only door I had left. The harsh fluorescent lights burned my retinas, washing out the world in a blinding white glare. As my vision adjusted, the blur sharpened into the terrifying geometry of a hospital room. There were tubes snake-charming their way into my nose and arms, taping me to a web of machinery that beeped with a mocking, rhythmic indifference. The mechanical whoosh hiss of a ventilator was breathing for me, forcing air into lungs that refused to draw it themselves. I was a prisoner in a glass coffin of my own flesh. Locked-in syndrome. My mind was sharp, a diamond cutting glass, processing every photon of light and every decibel of sound. But my body was a shipwreck on the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Standing at the foot of my bed were the two people I had trusted to be my anchor, the two people I had designated to hold the line when I could no longer stand, my daughter, Claire, and her husband, Todd. They weren't holding my hand. They weren't weeping.
They weren't asking the doctors for updates or praying for a miracle. They were looking at a tablet. "The lake house should go first," Todd whispered. His voice didn't carry the tremble of grief. It vibrated with a greed I had never noticed before, a hunger that had been hiding behind his polite smiles at Thanksgiving dinners. "The market is hot right now." "He's not dead yet, Todd," Claire hissed. But as I focused my eyes on her, I realized there was no sorrow in her voice, only annoyance. She looked at me not as her father, but as a bureaucratic delay. "Dr. Evans said he could be in this vegetative state for years. The trust fund is locked until he actually passes." "Not if we withdraw care," Todd said, glancing casually at the machine that was pumping oxygen into my blood. "Quality of life, Claire. Think about it. He wouldn't want this. He's a vegetable. Look at him. There's nobody home." I lay there, a corpse with a beating heart, listening to my own child plan to pull the plug to pay off her husband's gambling debts. If you've ever screamed in a nightmare and no sound came out, hit that subscribe button. You need to see how I broke the silence without speaking a single word. The betrayal hit me harder than the stroke had. The stroke was just biology. This was treason. I had paid for Claire's college tuition so she wouldn't start life with debt. I had bailed Todd out of his failed tech startup 3 years ago, writing a check that decimated my savings because I believed in family. I had loved them. I had welcomed them into my home. And now I was just an obstacle between them and my portfolio. I was a speed bump on their road to easy money. I tried to thrash. I tried to shake the bed rails. I tried to bite through the intubation tube. I poured every ounce of my will, every bit of the rage that was boiling my blood into moving a single muscle. But I was stone. I was a statue carved from pain. The only thing that moved was a single tear. It leaked from the corner of my left eye, hot and stinging, tracing a slow path down my temple into the pillow. Todd saw it. He didn't look away. He reached out with his thumb and wiped it away, pressing hard enough to bruise the skin. "Reflex tears," he said dismissively to Claire. "The doctor warned us about this. The brainstem is just firing random signals. It mimics emotion, but it's just biology." "Let's go get coffee," Claire said, turning her back on me. They walked out.
They left me alone with the whoosh hiss of the ventilator and the crushing weight of my own helplessness. I closed my eyes. I retreated into the dark. I needed to think. I needed to assess my tactical situation. Situation report. I am immobile. I am mute. I am presumed brain dead. The enemy controls the environment. The enemy controls the timeline. Assets. My mind. My memory. My eyes. I was Henry Cobb. I had survived typhoons, combat zones, and the death of my wife. I would not let a couple of greedy suburbanites erase me without a fight. I knew Morse code better than I knew English. It was a language of rhythm, of duration. Dit, dit, dit. Da, da, da. I spent the night practicing. Open, close, open, close. My eyelids were heavy, sticky with exhaustion, but I forced them to work. I treated them like heavy blast doors. I drilled until the muscles twitched with fatigue. I counted the seconds. A short blink for a dot, a long blink for a dash. I waited. The next morning, the rain was lashing against the window, sounding like shrapnel hitting the hull. My salvation arrived at 0900 hours, in the form of an old friend. Commander Jack Miller marched into the room, my former commanding officer. He walked with a cane now, his hip giving him trouble after 40 years of service, but his eyes were as sharp as they had been on the bridge of the USS Bremerton. He was wearing his old bomber jacket, bringing the smell of wet wool and ozone into the sterile room. He didn't look at the machines. He looked at me. He pulled a chair right up to the bed rail, ignoring the hospital protocol about distance. He sat down, leaning forward, talking to me as if I were sitting across from him at the VFW hall with a cold beer in my hand. "They say you're checked out, Henry," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion, cracking slightly on my name. "They told me not to bother coming." He took a breath, gripping the bed rail with a hand that shook slightly. "But I don't buy it," Jack said. "You're too stubborn to leave a room without saying goodbye." Claire was hovering in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, guarding the exit like a prison warden. "He can't hear you, Jack. The cortex is destroyed." "I'm talking to his soul, Claire," Jack snapped, not looking back at her. "Fine," Claire huffed. 5 minutes. She didn't leave, though. She stayed just outside the door, watching. Jack looked at me. He looked deep into my eyes, searching for the spark he had relied on for decades.
"Henry," he whispered, "if you're in there, if you can hear me, give me a sign. Anything." I focused. The room narrowed down to Jack's face. I poured every ounce of my will into my eyelids. Dit. A short, sharp blink. I held them open. Daw. A long, deliberate closure. 1 second. 2 seconds. Open. Jack frowned. He stopped breathing. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. "Do it again," he commanded softly. I did it again. Daw. T. Dit, dit, dit. S. No, I needed to be clearer. I stopped. I reset. I needed a word that would cut through the doubt. I needed a word that would start a war. I started. Daw did. In. I paused. Jack watched. Daw, daw, daw. Oh. No. Jack stiffened. His eyes went wide. He looked at Claire in the hallway to ensure she hadn't noticed, then looked back at me with a fierce intensity. "You're signaling," he whispered. "You're sending. Okay. Okay, Master Chief." He started reciting the alphabet, a trick we had used in training for silent communication. A. B. C. I blinked hard on M. M. Jack whispered. He wrote it on the palm of his hand with his finger. A. B. C. D. E.
G-H-I-J-K-L-M-N-O-P-Q-R-S-T. I blinked on you. You, Jack said, his brow furrowed. R, I signaled next. R, Jack repeated. M-U-R. He paused. He looked at me, a question forming in his eyes, a or dawning on him. He sped up the recitation. I blinked on D. I blinked on E. I blinked on R. M-U-R-D-E-R. The word took 5 minutes to spell. It was agonizing. My eyes burned as if they were full of sand. Tears streamed down my face from the effort, but Jack Miller read it. His face went pale, draining of all color, and then flushed a deep, violent red with suppressed rage. He looked toward the door where Claire was tapping on her phone. He looked back at me. He reached out and squeezed my paralyzed hand. He squeezed it hard enough to tell me he was ready to kill for me. "Okay, Henry," Jack said loudly, his voice trembling slightly for the benefit of the audience in the hall. "I'll let you rest." He stood up. He leaned in to pretend to adjust my pillow, bringing his mouth right to my ear. "I read you, Master Chief," he whispered, his voice a low growl of steel, loud and clear. "I'm going to get the JAG. I'm going to get the police. You hold the line." He straightened up. He walked past Claire without looking at her, because if he had looked at her, he would have struck her.
"Goodbye, Jack," Claire called out with fake sweetness. "We'll see," Jack muttered. But the war wasn't over. The enemy was still inside the wire. That night, the hospital was quiet. The nurses were at the station down the hall. I lay in the dark, feigning sleep, eyes closed, breathing rhythmic, letting the ventilator do the work, when the door opened. It was Claire and Todd. They had returned. They walked to the side of the bed. I felt the air shift as they stood over me. They thought I was unconscious. They thought I was meat. "Todd," whispered. The sound of his voice made my heart rate spike on the monitor, but they didn't notice. They were too busy conspiring. "Yes," Claire replied. Her voice was calm, practiced. I threw the sugar pills in the medical waste bin in the parking garage. I put his real blood thinners back in the Sunday slot. My blood ran cold. The stroke wasn't an accident. It wasn't age. It wasn't stress. "Good," Todd said, because replacing his anticoagulants with sugar pills for 3 weeks, that was risky, Claire. If he had stroked out while driving, he could have killed someone else. This is cleaner. The stroke was inevitable without the medication. "It worked," Claire said. "He's gone, Todd." "We need to pull the plug tomorrow," Todd said. I felt his hand rest on the bed rail, inches from my arm. "Miller is sniffing around. That old Navy guy gave me the creeps today. We can't let him stir up trouble. We tell Dr. Evans that seeing him like this is too painful. We tell him Henry is suffering." "Tomorrow," Claire agreed. I lay there, the truth of my stroke finally revealed in the stark, ugly light of their confession. It wasn't nature. It was them. My daughter had systematically removed the medication keeping my blood from clotting, replacing it with sugar, waiting for the clot to hit my brain like a sniper's bullet. They had murdered me slowly, over weeks, smiling at me while they handed me the poison of omission. And now they wanted to finish the job before I could wake up. They wanted to turn off the machine that was keeping their victim alive. They turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind them, secure in their victory. But they didn't know the radio was still transmitting. They didn't know that the vegetable in the bed was recording every word, and they didn't know that Jack Miller was already mobilizing the fleet. I opened my eyes in the dark. Tomorrow, I thought, bring it on.
The next morning brought a storm, a violent, brooding tempest that lashed against the hospital window like shrapnel. The wind howled around the corners of the building, a mournful, angry sound that matched the frequency of the rage vibrating inside my paralyzed skull. The gray light filtering through the blinds was unforgiving, casting long, pale shadows across the sterile room where my execution had been scheduled for 2 p.m. The atmosphere inside the room was even more volatile than the weather. It was a pressure cooker of conflicting agendas, smelling of damp wool, expensive perfume, and the sharp, acrid scent of fear. Dr. Evans stood at the foot of the bed, clutching his clipboard like a shield. He looked tired, a man caught between medical protocol and a family dispute he didn't understand. On one side of the room stood my executioners, Claire and Todd. They were dressed in somber black, a costume change they must have coordinated over breakfast. Claire was wearing waterproof mascara, a calculated choice, and clutching a tissue she hadn't used yet. Todd stood with his hands clasped in front of him, performing the role of the grieving, stoic son-in-law perfectly, though his eyes kept darting to the clock on the wall. On the other side of the room stood the resistance. Commander Jack Miller, my old CO, stood at parade rest, his cane planted firmly on the linoleum. Next to him was a woman I didn't know, but whose presence radiated a lethal competence. She wore a sharp gray suit that looked like armor, and her eyes scanned the room with the precision of a radar sweep. "This is highly irregular," Dr. Evans said, his voice tight as he looked between the two groups. "Mrs. Cobb has medical power of attorney. We have discussed the prognosis extensively." "My father wouldn't want this," Claire interrupted, her voice cracking with a sob that sounded convincing enough to fool anyone who hadn't watched her swap my medication. She stepped forward, placing a hand on my shin. I felt the hate of her palm through the blanket, a brand of ownership. He hated machines. He was a proud man. He wanted to go with dignity. "Please, doctor, turn it off." "Stop," the woman in the gray suit said. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her voice was calm, low, and commanded the room instantly. It was the voice of authority, the kind that stops conversations and freezes motion. "I am Patricia Vance," she announced, stepping forward.
I am an attorney specializing in elder law and criminal negligence. I am representing Mr. Cobb's interests as retained by Commander Miller, and we have reason to believe Mr. Cobb is conscious, competent, and communicating. Removing life support at this stage would not be a mercy-killing, doctor. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Homicide. Todd scoffed, a nervous, jagged laugh that sounded like a bark. "Communicating? Are you insane?" He gestured wildly at my frozen body, at the tubes, at the slackness of my jaw. "His brain is mush. Jack is just a senile old man imagining things because he can't let go of the past. There is nobody home." I heard him. I heard every syllable of his contempt, and I hated him with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins. Vegetable. I would make him eat that word. "Let's test it," Jack said. He stepped forward, moving with a surprising agility for a man with a bad hip. He pulled a compact video camera from his shoulder bag and set it on a tripod he had brought in, aiming the lens directly at my face. He flipped the screen out. The red recording light blinked on. "Doctor," Jack said, looking at Evans, "you're a man of science. Verify it. Ask him a question, a yes or no question." Dr. Evans hesitated. He looked at the camera, then at Claire, who was pale and trembling with a rage she was struggling to hide. He sighed, the heavy exhale of a man realizing his day had just become a nightmare. He walked to the side of the bed. He leaned over me, his face entering my field of vision. He smelled of antiseptic soap. "Can you hear me? If you can hear me." The room went silent. The storm outside seemed to pause. The only sound was the mechanical rhythm of my own survival. Whoosh, click, whoosh, click. I waited. I let the tension build. I wanted them to sweat. I wanted Todd to think he was right for one glorious second. I looked at Claire. I saw the panic flickering in her eyes, the terrifying realization that her narrative was about to fracture. Then, I blinked. It wasn't a flutter. It wasn't a spasm. It was a hard, deliberate, long shudder of my eyelids. I held them closed for a full 2 seconds, darkness enveloping me, before snapping them open again. "Yes," Dr. Evans gasped, recoiling slightly. "It's a spasm. Nerve endings firing."
"Ask him something only he would know," Jack challenged, stepping between Todd and the bed, using his cane as a barrier. "I don't know his service number," Dr. Evans said, his hands shaking as he adjusted his glasses. "I do," Jack said. "It ends in 492. I focused. My eyes felt like sandpaper. The muscles controlling my eyelids were screaming with fatigue. They were the only soldiers left in the army of my body, and they were exhausted. But I was fueled by a rage that burned hotter than the sun. I would not die today. I would not let them win. I prepared the signal, the number 2, in Morse code.
Dit-dit-da-da-da. Wait, no. My mind raced. Jack asked for the digit, just the count. 2 blinks? No, Jack knew code. He meant the character. Dit-dit-da-da-da is 2. I focused. Blink, short, blink, short, blink, long, blink, long, blink, long. I stopped. I waited. I stared straight into the camera lens. He's confused, Claire said, her voice rising to a shriek. She stepped forward to block the camera view. This is torture. You're torturing him. Look at his eyes. They're watering. Wait, Jack said, grabbing her arm and moving her aside gently but firmly. He's signaling. He just gave me a 2. That's the digit, Todd yelled, wiping sweat from his upper lip. He's blinking randomly. It's a coincidence. Actually, Patricia Vance interrupted. She stepped closer to the bed, her eyes locked on mine. She wasn't looking at the monitor. She was looking at me. He's been blinking something else while you were shouting. Jack, did you catch that? Jack nodded, looking down at his notepad where he had been scribbling furiously, his hand moving in time with my eyes. I got it. Read it, Patricia commanded. Jack looked at the paper. Then he looked at Claire. His expression wasn't triumphant. It was disgusted. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. It sucked the oxygen out of the room. Claire's face drained of color, leaving her looking like a wax doll melting under heat. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Todd took a step back toward the door, his instinct for self-preservation kicking in. Adol, Dr. Evans repeated, bewildered. Mr. Cobb is on a standard saline drip. There's no... Doctor, Patricia said, her voice turning into a steel trap snapping shut. We are formally requesting a toxicology screen to check for the absence of his prescribed anticoagulants over the last 3 weeks.
We are also requesting a screen for whatever sedative was likely administered to mimic the stroke symptoms initially. She turned to Todd. We have the motive, your gambling debts, which my investigators uncovered yesterday. We have the opportunity.
This is insane, Claire shrieked. She lunged toward the bed. Dad, tell them you love us. She grabbed my arm. Her fingernails dug into my flesh. The pain was sharp, searing, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Instead, I looked at her. I looked at the daughter I had raised. I looked at the woman I had taught to ride a bike, the woman I had walked down the aisle. I looked past the tears and the panic and saw the stranger who had swapped my pills for sugar, the stranger who had watched me fade away so she could pay for her husband's mistakes. I held her gaze, and then I blinked again, slowly, deliberately. G, da, da, dit. U, di, di, da. I, di, di. L, di, da, di, di. T, da. Y, da, di, da, da. Jack read it aloud as I sent it, letter by letter. The door to the room swung open. The 2 police officers, who Jack had stationed in the hallway, stepped in. They brought the smell of rain and authority with them. The realization hit Todd first. He looked at the officers, then at the window, realizing there was no escape. He tried to run anyway, shoving Dr. Evans aside in a desperate panic. "Todd!" she shouted. But he was slow. Claire collapsed into the visitor's chair. She didn't fight. She dissolved. She sobbed, rocking back and forth, burying her face in her hands, begging me to stop them, begging me to say it was all a misunderstanding. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I watched them being cuffed. I watched the officer read them their rights, the right to remain silent, a right I had been forced to exercise for months against my will. I watched the legacy of betrayal being dragged out of the room, kicking and screaming. I felt no sadness. I searched my heart for it, but the well was dry. There was only a cold, hard satisfaction. The mission was accomplished. The threat was neutralized. Dr. Evans looked at me, shaken to his core. He wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. "Mister," he stammered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." He took a breath, composing himself. "We'll get you a communication board immediately. Eye tracking software. We'll start physical therapy. It will be hard, but..." I looked at Jack, my old friend, my brother in arms.
He was leaning on his cane, looking exhausted but victorious. He wiped a tear from his cheek with a rough knuckle and gave me a thumbs up. I blinked again. THAT.
A-N-K-Y-O-U. Jack nodded. Roger that, Henry. The storm outside had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, dissolving into wisps of gray. A single beam of sunlight pierced through the gloom, casting a brilliant, warm rectangle of light onto the foot of my bed. I was still trapped in my body, yes. The road to recovery would be hell. I might never walk again. I might never speak with my voice again. But the silence was broken. The glass coffin had shattered. I was awake. I was alive. And for the first time in months, I was the one in control of the frequency.